And then I headed out and got over in this area somewhere and ran into this partner who I taught with for many years. And we walked down into the waterway there, and when I was last here, 2 years ago, it looked like it had for a number of years. And it's totally different, and then she tells me that's new this year, so you guys know what it looked like before. It's like, wow. But yeah, history I taught, well, I don't know, is that still the same room? Because he taught in the room I was in most of the time. Oh, okay. Is I mean, did they destroy that room? Because Mrs. Rousseau's room, which was next door, is now the faculty.
Oh yeah, that's the only one I
Okay, so you don't miss it. When you get to come back next year for reunions, get here, because you don't know, if you miss it here, you don't know what you're going to find. Yeah. Back. But I have always liked history. I had, 26 years of 8th graders. And invariably somebody said, how did you get into it? What makes you like history? What made you? I don't know. I really don't know. When I learned to read, when I was maybe 5, I just got interested and picked up books that talked about kings and generals and battles and presidents and whatever. So it comes either from the environment that I was in, or genes, because my son, as I was telling Mr. Joe, is now finishing up his 13th year as a history teacher down in Virginia. He's a graduate of the University of Virginia, and he stayed down there. So, but the Civil War has always been, I like all kinds. I taught 6th grade here, we learned about the rise of Islam. I taught 7th grade, and we talked about medieval times. I taught 8th grade, and actually we did world geography for quite a few years, and then we did American history. And American history has always kind of been my favorite thing, and of all the things in American history, the Civil War, at least since I was in high school, which was 5 years ago, has always been kind of my favorite. So before I started, just one more little abstract fact. I thought about last night, gee, I wonder how long these, I've been out 10 years, so I figured back. None of you were here, even in pre-K, unless my math is wrong, the last year I taught, in 2004 and 2005.
Oh yeah, we
I was here in 2005.
We came the next year.
2005, 2006,
Yeah.
you might have been here. I was already gone after June of 2005.
Yeah.
You're the first group that I've come back that I have no connection with, or you have no connection. So, but here we are, and let's get started. All right, have you all covered the Civil War, or are you covering it now? How far have you gotten?
Not too far.
Not too far.
We got the slang word.
Okay,
Yeah.
because I usually tend to throw out a lot of terms, and I want you to understand what they are, to know what they are. So if there's something that I start talking about, a battle or a general or a unit or something about, and you haven't come across it yet, please don't hesitate to raise your hand and ask questions. I mean, I've always been a teacher, so I don't mind asking or answering questions. Yeah.
Why is the South called the Civil War the War of Northern Aggression?
Because, among other things, they felt they were being invaded. As a matter of fact, that's a good way to start talking about what motivated men to go off and fight. A war that most people on both sides thought, it's getting started in the spring of 1861. Most people thought, Christmas maybe at the latest. Abraham Lincoln had just become president when the war started. Anybody tell me where the first shots were fired? You might have covered that already. Yeah. Which is where, you know?
Georgia?
No? Close. Oh, that time.
South Dakota, South Carolina.
All right, it's actually in Charleston Harbor, Charleston, South Carolina. One of the few Civil War sites I haven't been to yet. Lincoln said, okay, we're going to have to expand the size of the U.S. Army to fight this rebellion because the Army was really, really small. I can't think of the numbers now, only a few thousand men. Most of them were out on the frontier watching the Indians. So he called for 75,000 volunteers. to fight, to sign up to fight. You want to guess for how long?
7 years.
3 months.
Raise your hands. Okay.
How long was 3 weeks, a month?
No?
I think we learned this in
3 weeks, it's
Okay.
That's how long I thought it was.
3 months. 3 months over here, you're right. That would have taken, if they signed up in April, through May, June, and July, it might have gotten them to the first big land battle fought at Bull Run, or the Confederates call it Manassas, in northern Virginia, and then they could go home. The war is going to last almost 4 years longer than that. Eventually they got smart and decided to have the guys sign up, some for 2 years, but most for 3, or 3 years or the war, which meant 3 years or till the war ended, whichever it happened to be. Okay, I know my dad served in the Navy during World War II, and that was the terms they got. You sign up for 3 years or the war. So if the war lasted less than 3 years, and you were not killed or anything like that, you got to go home. If it lasted longer than 3 years, you stayed in until it got over. So, but in the beginning, even somebody like Lincoln, who's generally considered to be a pretty smart guy, okay, 3 months. All that he achieved there, he did raise the number of troops. He called on each state's governor, to send a certain number of volunteers to make up the 75,000. What it did was drive Virginia, Tennessee, Arkansas, and North Carolina to join the other 7 states from the Deep South that had already split off to form the Confederacy. It almost drove out Kentucky and Missouri, which were 2 slave states. They stayed loyal to the Union, but there were large numbers of people in both states that did not like this whole idea. And they almost seceded, but they were held in sometimes at the point of the bayonet, literally. The army showed up, said, you better not secede, so they didn't. So Southerners, to win this war, okay, have you talked about the strategies that each side...
Flanking.
I'm sorry?
Flanking.
Well, that's a tactic. That's something you use on the battlefield. This is like a master plan to try to win a war. Yeah.
I know some of the tactics for the Civil War where the North's plan was to take over Mississippi.
Okay, that's strategy, but you're right. That's one part of this generally considered to be a 3-part strategy. Take control of the Mississippi River, which will not only allow the northern states in what was then the northwestern part of the United States, like Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, and so on, to ship goods down and up the river, but also do what? The Confederacy.
Didn't the Confederacy just like want to defend and
To defend.
yeah.
Well, yeah, let's hold off, you're right, let's hold off on the Confederacy. If the North gains control of the Mississippi River, what does that do geographically to the Confederacy? Okay. Yeah, not exactly mathematically half, but Arkansas, most of Louisiana, and Texas are isolated across the river. And Texas, even in those days, was famous for beef and things like that to help feed the troops. Okay, and also those hides could be used for leather, and you'll see there's a lot of uses for leather. Yeah.
Walk-off words.
All right, what's that term that means this exactly what you said? Block off the southern ports so they couldn't trade. Okay.
Blockade.
Blockade. Okay. We didn't have much of a navy, so the blockade wasn't all that successful in the beginning. But as the war went on and northern factories and shipyards turned out more and more ships, it got to be very effective. Why did the South rely so much on trading with other countries? Okay.
I don't really know.
Oh. Okay. Okay.
They had no factories, they relied on other countries.
Well, not none, but they had very few, especially when compared with the North. The North took a while to get all their industries in gear, but once they got rolling, it was like the U.S. when World War II started. Our army was not the biggest or the greatest coming out of the period between the 2 world wars. So we had to kind of, well, not exactly start from scratch, but close to it. After one, Everybody take one step forward. Everybody. Thank you. I needed room back here. I'm a corporal, I'm a sergeant, I might even be a second lieutenant. In my case, I'm a non-commissioned officer.
General.
Okay? I am a file closer. I'm back here. Now, for one thing, I'm smart and I'm also lucky. Why am I lucky?
You're in the back.
I'm in the back. You've got all these people up here to take bullets before they get to me. But some of us are going to get hit too. Okay? Remember these weapons? They got cannons that can fire accurately at 1 mile to 1.5 miles or even further. So, because they've got rifled cannon barrels as well as rifled muskets. Yeah,
Could they like shoot first or not?
sure. See this? This little piece of lead here, soft lead. If it hits something, a tree, a rock, a human body, the hole going in isn't going to be much bigger than this. But if it does happen to pass through your body completely, and it can, the hole coming out on the other side could be as big around as my fist, because this will flatten out. And it will take with it cloth, bone, blood, dirt, you name it. Is infection a big problem in the Civil War?
Yeah.
You better believe it. What happens if my friend here gets shot in the arm? Amputation, almost
They would
certain.
cut off the arm.
Okay. Shh, quiet down. What if this friend over here gets a cannonball that tears off part of his leg? What happens to the rest of the leg? Amputation. 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 They couldn't save bones that were multiple fractures. They couldn't do it. They knew if they didn't remove the limb, you were going to get infected. You probably would get infected anyway, even if they did. And infections were the big killers. Okay. So, that's the way. And these weapons are deadly at several hundred yards. So, okay. They're up front, the front rank. Back here's the rear rank. They're the files. I'm the file closer. What's my job back here other than trying to not get
Call out
hit?
orders.
Make sure they do what?
Their job.
Their job. If the command from the colonel of our regiment says, and a regiment was a unit of, it's supposed to be about 1,000 men, but by the time the war was over, a lot of the men were already dead, so you might only have a couple of hundred men in your regiment. If the command was forward march, I better make sure with the other file closers that these file ranks and files move forward. If it's time to stop and fire, there's different ways that they can fire by files. These two fire, then these two, then these two, then those two. If it's filed by rank, maybe the first rank will all fire together, and then while they're reloading, the second rank will fire together. If we're going to march to the right oblique, which is that way, I've got to make sure they know what they're doing, which is why training would have been good, but a lot of them didn't get much. Okay? So I'm back here trying to make sure these people do what they're supposed to do. In the meantime, what's happening to them? They're getting shot at. Okay? Hold on. They're getting shot at. You either, when you read, hang on, when you read first-person narratives, people's their journals and diaries again. If any of you ever get serious about history, read those journals and diaries and letters. They're out there. They've been published. The fear that had to be in both sides, and yet, more often than not, they would go forward when the colonel said go forward. They would, what do we do? Oh, thank you, Mrs. Moore, you replaced. Okay, you replaced, good. I want gaps in my line, okay? They would do it, but sometimes somebody would run. The file closers had the orders very often, shoot any man who runs. Oh, yeah. And it happened. To make, when my son was in high school and he was really cool in the idea of making reenactments more realistic, he and some of his buddies, one guy was already at Vanderbilt University at the time, they decided in this one battle they were going to turn around and run. And they had file closers. And the file closers, of course, they couldn't shoot them, okay? But they ran after them, and if they grabbed them, they would push them back in line with their rifle musket, okay, trying to get them. And you know, every time there was this one, they had this big kick, and they were teenagers, so they thought that'd be cool. Guys ran away. It wouldn't run away, make it look more real. Okay, the file closers try to do their job too. It can be a nasty business. We talked about amputations. We talked about people dying from disease. We talked about 700,000 deaths in this war, more than any other. Whether the South was going to win its independence, or the North was going to preserve the Union, and by the way, maybe end slavery, whether they wanted to do that or not. It was important. It was important for the officers to know what they were doing. It was important for the file closers to be able to do their job and make sure everybody else did theirs. All right. Do we have time for a few questions? Sit down, guys. Thank you very much.
You all survived your first battle.
Now, if you're looking closely, you can tell that because it's 60 some odd degrees out there, I'm sweating. So I'm going to get rid of some of this stuff. Questions, please, one at a time. Okay.
Would one be able to almost, play dead during the battle if they did not want to fight?
Oh, I'm sure guys tried all kinds of tricks to. Oh, I want to do one more thing. I'm sure there were some who, tried all kinds of things to avoid getting hurt. You probably haven't read it yet, but you might maybe when you get to high school or some point, a Civil War novel written by a man named Stephen Crane called Red Badge of Courage. And in it, this guy Henry, and I can't remember his last name, but he's the sort of hero of the novel. He runs away at one battle in the Civil War, and he's shamed. He's hanging out with all these guys that have either run away or they've been wounded, and they're behind the lines. And, he knows when you're in a unit, like my little 8-man unit here, you probably all came from the same town or the same county. You probably know one another back home. You might be related to a lot of these people. Whether the South was going to win its independence, or the North was going to preserve the Union, and by the way, maybe end slavery, whether they wanted to do that or not. It was important. It was important for the officers to know what they were doing. It was important for the file closers to be able to do their job and make sure everybody else did theirs. All right. Do we have time for a few questions? Sit down, guys. Thank you very much.
You all survived your first battle.
Now, if you're looking closely, you can tell that because it's 60 some odd degrees out there, I'm sweating. So I'm going to get rid of some of this stuff. Questions, please, one at a time. Okay.
Would one be able to almost, play dead during the battle if they did not want to fight?
Oh, I'm sure guys tried all kinds of tricks to. Oh, I want to do one more thing. I'm sure there were some who, tried all kinds of things to avoid getting hurt. You probably haven't read it yet, but you might maybe when you get to high school or some point, a Civil War novel written by a man named Stephen Crane called Red Badge of Courage. And in it, this guy Henry, and I can't remember his last name, but he's the sort of hero of the novel. He runs away at one battle in the Civil War, and he's shamed. He's hanging out with all these guys that have either run away or they've been wounded, and they're behind the lines. And, he knows when you're in a unit, like my little 8-man unit here, you probably all came from the same town or the same county. You probably know one another back home. You might be related to a lot of these people.